Welcome to The Teacher's Story, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of educators and advocates in the field of education. Here, we celebrate those who champion our children's potential and seek innovative approaches to nurture their brilliance. Join us as we share candid stories, explore impactful ideas, and showcase effective educational programs. This podcast stands for transparency, authenticity, and innovation, driven by the belief that we can revolutionize the education system to ensure every individual thrives. Together, let's redefine education as a pathway to human flourishing. Hi, welcome to The Teacher's Story. I'm Jackie Scully, and today we have Tamara Miller Davis with us. She is an author of Despite the Buzz, a wonderful book. It's a fiction story, but it has lots of wonderful commentary of today's world of technology and how that also impacts teenagers, the education experience. And I think there's a lot that not only myself and others can relate to as teachers, but parents as well. So I'm so excited to dive into not only your story, but your book. Tamara is also a storyteller, a parent club volunteer, mom collective contributor, substitute teacher, former ESL teacher and tutor, and she's in California, and U.S. Coast Guard veteran. So thank you for your service.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm so glad to be here today. I really appreciate you and your advocacy for teachers and the way that you look at education and see room for improvement and the light that you find in things, the good that you see in life. So I enjoyed reading your book and I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. I want to first ask you, what was like your kind of introduction into wanting to even get involved in thinking about education or being involved as like a substitute ESL teacher? We'll get a little bit of your backstory before we'll get into your work and your book.
Thank you. Yeah. I grew up in Michigan and I was very involved in high school, and I love school as a learner and a teacher. And I just wanted to continue in that field. I enjoy learning and I consider myself a lifelong learner. So being in the classroom contributes to that experience. And I earned a teaching credential in English. And I've been a substitute teacher since then, so for about 15 years. And I've worked at 8 summer camps teaching international students. And I also had a tutoring business that began actually in high school. I tutored a couple of students and friends. And then out here, I helped aspiring nurses pass an entry
Mm.
test to get into nursing school regarding the reading and English portions. So I enjoyed working with people in that way and helping them prepare for the test. Uh, yeah, I use my teaching skills at home too as a mom. And I definitely brought that forward in my book, which is set in a reflective writing classroom.
Yes, I love all the different roles and especially working with like international students in a summer camp. I had one summer program. I was in China teaching international, well, I was teaching Chinese students. And so I think it's great to like learn from students from all different backgrounds and then also nursing students. I think that's wonderful. So you have a very vast, diverse background in education, which I think will bring kind of your experience into your storytelling. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book. Like the first, before like getting into the book, like how did you come to this idea and how you wanted to write it before we kind of get into the plot and everything?
Thank you. Yeah, I felt the tug of tech's influence myself, and I was a new mom and substituting and seeing how cell phones were impacting learning in schools, especially in a public high school realm where a lot of the kids had phones and they were looking down at their laps and being distracted by that, and the teacher was competing for attention. And throughout my teaching credential program, I did a lot of observations around different campuses and I did student teaching, so I was exposed to different environments. And my kids go to an independent or private school. So that's where I taught at summer camp. So I feel like I've seen the public realm through student teaching and substitute teaching. I've seen the private realm through my own kids and through summer camp. And then I'm mostly sub at a charter school. So I've been grateful to have windows into those three worlds. And I wanted to explore this idea of tech's influence upon relationships, upon safety, learning, and well being. And I thought, well, I could write a novel and use the filter of fiction and the fun of fiction to present these ideas and offer readers an opportunity to reflect upon their own media usage and maybe make some changes or think about it differently or have structure in their homes for their own
Mm,
kids. So it's told from a teacher's point of view, as you know, and it's adult fiction recommended for readers over 14, but I would say that it's multi-generational. Parents can definitely relate because the teacher is in her early 30s, so there are some flashbacks to our era and how
mm,
things were different then compared to now in the classroom and in life with relationships, and all taking, smartphones into account. So yeah, there are digital wellness insights throughout and resources in the back,
mhm,
educational aspects for sure, and then book club questions in the back. So I really approached the project with compassion and concern for how things are, and then curiosity through reading the research. I was alarmed at times with some
mm,
of the statistics about how technology and social media is affecting people, how we think, how we behave, especially teenagers, and how their brains aren't fully developed yet. So they don't
mhm,
have the impulse control and they're easily addicted and distracted. And that can lead to sleep loss,
mhm,
and body image issues
mm,
and comparison situations and just depression, anxiety, and these other things that I think we're all in this digital experiment together. And we have to take a close look now that we've been in it for a while and say what's working and what's not. And I'm so thankful that people are out there doing the research and taking a stand and making a difference. And I hope to contribute to that conversation.
Well, you definitely are, and I relate it so much to this main character as the teacher in, like, her 30s. I'm older now, but I'm from that generation, right? Like, growing up in school in the 90s and kind of being in this, like, sweet generation of, it's like a micro generation, it's not, like, on paper, but they call it, Zennials. So, like, between the Gen X and the millennial, I'm, like, technically right at the beginning of millennial, but growing up really through school with not a lot of technology. I mean, I didn't really use a computer until high school, and not more so until college, and so then to enter the world of being a teacher and then, like, really the beginning of my teaching was, like, just the beginning of the smartphone. And it was everywhere within, like, a matter of a couple years, like, kids having it before I had it. And then I'm like, "Whoa, what are we" I mean, like, we think of, like, AI now as, like, "What are we gonna do with this?" That's, like, when smartphones came out. We're like, "What are we gonna do?" And it still is, like, I'm in my 19th year teaching. It's very difficult to you try to set a tone in the classroom, set structure, but you also know that it's so much part of their lives. It's so much part of our lives too. We've done so many things in my school where we tried to have like drop your phone in this little like cubby over here. And or that didn't work and the kids pushed against that. And I'm at an independent school, so the kids also have a lot of voice, which is great. And they
Mhm.
came back to the cell phone policy and said, well, why don't we leave it in our bag? And when we have to like go somewhere like the bathroom, we put it on our desk. And that was like, okay, that's a compromise. That only lasted for so long because as a teacher, you constantly have to say, oh, if you're going to the bathroom, can you leave your phone on the desk? Because they don't do it. Because what's
Mm.
happening is they take it with them and then they're gone for like 20 minutes and they're just on their phone constantly. Students can't really sit still or sit in any kind of silence without their phone. I mean, it's so hard to watch because they don't really understand being bored. and how boredom is actually a good thing in a way, like when you have those downtime, because that's when you can let your mind rest and be
Mhm.
creative and be imaginative. So I think this is a great book, not only for teachers, parents, but I wonder, like, with students too, reading this and being like, oh my gosh, like maybe I didn't think about it that way, or maybe I didn't think how it takes a hold of my life. And we're not talking about ditching phones or ditching technology, but it's like becoming aware of it
Mm.
and setting up personal boundaries, not just like, what are we going to do in school as far as rules go or parents having rules, but like talking to kids and teens about their own boundaries so that they can make rules themselves. So that when they're a functional adult in the world, when you have to put your phone away. Like when I'm engaged in a conversation with someone, that phone's turned over or it's away somewhere because it is a distraction. So I kind of want to get into the meat of your story and also maybe like feedback that you've received or how you've presented it to teachers, parents, maybe again, students as well. But can you share a little bit about the story itself? Not the whole thing. I'm sure you could tell that as like a whole, podcast itself. But just a little bit about it and then maybe some feedback you've been presented with.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you nailed some points there about how it's part of our lives. Tech is part of our lives, and we are going to continue to embrace technology, but we have to find ways that are fitting for us, depending on our values within our own selves and our households and our schools. So, yeah, regarding my story, it is realistic and romantic fiction. I've won two awards, one for contemporary romance and another for literary fiction. And the point of view follows the teacher. And let's see, it enabled me to speak up for causes I care about. And one of those causes is overcrowded public school classrooms.
Mm,
So that's where the story is set. It's set in a reflective writing classroom. And in that way, I'm able to encourage writing for oneself and not necessarily to share it online like we so often do these days. So the students have a journal, and it's a two-part journal, and one part they write in for themselves, and nobody reads that, not even the teacher, and she doesn't betray that. And then the other part is shared with peers and with the teacher. So that was deliberate to give people that idea that you can journal for yourself. It's
mm,
therapeutic, it's clarifying, it's so important, and it's worthwhile. So that was part of my mission too. And then the story makes a case for other timely topics as well. There is an exciting inciting moment or twist, you might call it, and you will see when you're reading it's meant to be surprising. And that's to bring awareness to another cause that
mm,
I usually don't tell people up front, but you'll see that I care, and I wanted to present that thoughtfully from sort of an alternative angle.
mhm,
um, and then each of the students in the story stand up for something symbolic and significant. And so they write letters to an unnamed president regarding their concerns, and developing their concerns and those personalities help me develop the characters and think about what do I want these students to say, because they
mm,
have meaningful things to say. And as a person who was very involved in high school, I know you and I were both in the National Honor Society. I was class president. Um, student council things and planning dances and all the things of high school. I think students do have important things to do and say, and it's such a formative experience and such a
mm.
formative time of life that I wanted to give the students in the story those opportunities as well to be artistic and creative and thoughtful, and to also struggle, as we all do, but with technology in mind.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have student voice. That's something that I always promote on the podcast as well, but I love how you promote it in the story, is that, it's also kind of showing a mirror to students like this is what you can do and achieve, and your voice does matter. And I think schools need to make more space for that if they haven't already. I mean, my school, as I just mentioned, does that. And I think it's really great that students should be working alongside faculty to make decisions, because really education's about them. It's about their experience. And I think too often many schools are adult centered and it's more
Mhm.
about what is going to make our lives easier, what is going to make the system kind of like flow, but then it's not giving the best opportunity for student voice and choice. And so I think having that representation in your story, in your book, allows for students who read it to say, oh, yeah, I do have a voice and I do have something to say and I want to stand up for something. I see that so much in the Gen Z, this
Mhm.
generation right now. And I always applaud my students for that because, of course, the old timer generations are always going to say, what's up with this generation? Like they're not, they're all over the place and distracted with technology and they don't know how to really like analyze and be critical thinkers. They're just getting their information from TikTok. Yeah, you'll hear all these things, but I'm like, but they also are standing up for a lot of different types of rights that maybe previous generations didn't, and they're not afraid to use their voice. And TikTok, Instagram, and those platforms have been very valuable in that way to share information. Yes, us as adults need to help them with deciphering and dissecting. Not everything is truth, and there's a lot of false information out there, but they're doing it and they're getting their voices out there and they're not really afraid to do that. So I love that part of it. Can you share anything about maybe the different spaces where you have been sharing your book and like how, again, you maybe had some feedback from parents, teachers, students in your communities?
Yes, thank you. Um, I agree that it's so important for students to have a voice, and the story is a mixed media piece. So the students contribute through journal entries, like I mentioned, the letters to the president, and then dialogue, of course. Um, Yeah, I've presented at a high school, and that was in regard to digital wellness. So the talking points were about that. And a student came up to me afterward and he gave me his feedback, which was very kind and friendly. And he gave it to me as a mom. And he said, I think you should do a gradual approach with your son. Like maybe start with a watch and then get like a dumb phone or a flip phone. And he was giving me advice, which I
Oh,
thought was awesome that he felt like I
yeah.
was accessible and open to input, and I was. And that was a neat conversation. And I've presented at a library about character development, and that felt fitting just to be in a library among all these great books and to be able to talk about the fictional piece. And then I've presented to a group about writing for therapy,
Mm,
actually, several groups. The Ventura County Writers Club, and then a injury center. And
mm,
so I'm able to talk about writing and fiction and digital wellness all because of this book. So it really gives me a talking
mm,
piece both on air and in person. I enjoy in person events. I like going to book festivals. I've been to the LA Times Festival of Books, and I enjoy interacting with people and finding common ground. And the cool thing about Despite the Buzz is there's such a variety of characters that usually I can say, oh, you'll relate to this character, or you might
mm,
relate to this because it's accessible in that way. And
mhm,
I try to do that because I'm both a Midwesterner and a Californian. So I tried to have both sides of the country in mind when I
mm,
was writing it. So I'm thankful for the feedback. I'll share one story. Recently, I met a mom friend at a rink for my daughter's birthday party. And we realized that we knew each other through the charter school because her children used to go there, but they now go to the independent school where my kids are. And I was telling her about my book, and she said that she's in a book club. And I thought, well, I'll take a chance. I'll kind of pitch my book to her because I think that she'll enjoy it. She's a surfer, she's a Californian, she's a mom. And I just got a vibe like, okay, she would like it. And so I gave her a copy. I didn't sell it to her, I gave it to her. And she read it and she wrote like such a great review, one of the best reviews I've had. And what she says about how I present technology's influence is thoughtful, and it made her think as a mom and as somebody who enjoys writing as well. So I'm thankful for that
mm.
kind of feedback.
I love that. And I love that you've gone to like so many different settings to present your book. It just shows the diversity of your stories, like themes and impact. You could say like the big message is technology. But it's also hitting on, I love this like idea of writing as therapeutic and how you went to a brain injury center to do like this as kind of like a workshop with writing. I absolutely love that. I teach psychology, and one of the last units we're covering happens to do with part of it is stress and health. And so one of my last lessons of the year with AP psychology, because they're wrapping up before the AP exam, is to talk about, well, how do we have coping mechanisms in our life to deal with stress? And I often do talk about journaling. Journaling, when you can just get your thoughts down on paper and you can just do just writing, don't worry about like how, you're trying to make it poetic or anything like that. You're just like writing for it coming out of you, can move an energy and make you feel so cleansed, and it's like a healing process. So I think that aspect of the book is really great, and that you are taking it to these different spaces. And then you have this feedback, from this mom about how you can look at your own parenting and your own life. I think this is going to be very expansive for you, and you're going to see yourself in these different forums that you can share the book. So I just applaud the work that you're doing. I love that we can highlight it here on the teacher story, author to author, being able to read each other's books and give feedback. And so my last part of the, conversation is always like education reform. And I know this book is part of that as well. So just anything else you would like to maybe share as far as your ideas of where do you think we could really change education moving now really into the 21st century, and maybe even like your book as a platform for that?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to have presented in a coffee shop and other local places. There are also dance aspects throughout the book, so it lends itself to dancers, and they would find that relatable. Going forward, I think we just need to continue to support teachers, honor them, applaud them, and try to get class sizes down. Um,
Mm,
or provide teachers with aids and students with accommodations and supports as needed, of course. And the charter school that I work at is really good about accommodating students and pulling them out into a resource type setting or providing paraeducators. And they just offer a stellar example of that. They also emphasize empathy, which I know is important to you as well. And
mhm,
and a freedom with responsibility. So I like that slogan. And nonviolent communication, I think
mm,
that's good as well. And so going forward regarding technology, I think media literacy is
mm,
important
mhm,
and digital citizenship, people having manners online and having boundaries regarding social media and usage, and for teachers to talk about this with their students because so many of them have phones, and to be
mhm,
authentic and to ask students, what is concerning you, what do you struggle with, and to just open that conversation. I think it would be really fruitful to have those kind of conversations because of course teachers are using tech too, and technology has a variety of tools which help learning, and that's awesome because we have different types of learners. As you know, there's the visual and the kinesthetic and the audio learners, and technology's tools open up windows for people, and that's all good. But regarding the cell phone usage, I think that's where we could somehow find a better way forward, and that is a huge conversation
mm,
that involves tech companies and parents and schools and people being mindful themselves. And so, um, let's see, in the classroom, I think students do better when phones are put away. And I
mhm.
recommend watching the movie Screenagers and its
Yeah.
sequels. So Dr. Delaney Rustin talks about a way for the day, having phones away in the classroom. And
Mm,
however your school interprets and wants to enforce that, that's up to the school and the admin, of course. But like you mentioned earlier, there are different ways to go about
mm,
that. At my kids' school, they have to have it in their backpack and off. Now, of course, people probably don't follow those rules 100%, but phones are not generally on students. So I think that's one way to go. And now there could be exceptions. Let's say there's a creative project and a student asks for permission to use the phone for video footage for an interview, perhaps. I think that's okay
Hmm.
to to have exceptions and to use tech as a tool. But I would say put the phone in do not disturb mode, so other
Mm.
things don't pop
Hmm.
up. And so uh, if you have certain places on campus where students are allowed to use phones during maybe lunchtime or whatever, that could help so that they're not widespread. That it's like, okay, this part of campus you're allowed to go and check or call your mom or whatever, and then that time is over and your phone's back in your bag. That's one approach. I've seen the little pockets like you
Mm.
described, locked and unlocked,
Mm.
and a variety of ways to deal. But I think, like I said earlier, we're all in this experiment together, and we can just think about what we want to continue going forward and what we want to curb or change or be more mindful about.
Yes, I love the word experiment because that is exactly what it is. And I think we need more grace with our kids and we need more grace with ourselves as adults because we're still learning it. When smartphones came out, when internet came out, when AI comes out, all of this, no one's giving us any set of instruction. Like we
Mhm.
don't, it's just technology emerges, it's out in the ether, and we kind of like figure it out as we go along. And it takes time, it takes decades. So I think we could approach this conversation like you're talking about, I think with media literacy. I think that should be in every school. It really should
Mhm.
be a class that is a requirement for students to take. Not embed it necessarily like, well, that's kind of sounds like it would be in the English department. Let's just throw this on the English department. I'm like, it is everywhere. It has to do with everything that we're learning. So it could be like a class that students just take, especially maybe as they're emerging into middle school, right? Like really
Mhm.
starting to get practice with how do we use our technology and teaching students, not just having rules in place, but teaching them why we have rules in place and how we want to set those boundaries for ourselves. So, like when you're out of the classroom and you're trying to do homework or you're having a conversation with a friend or family member, how do you set boundaries with your technology? Like getting students to have that cognition, right? And having that like internal dialogue of when do I want to use technology? When is it appropriate and not appropriate? So that they can have their own self-regulation. And it's not just like, oh, this is what I do in school, but out of school, it's like the wild, wild west, right? Like then it doesn't matter. I think those are important, tools to teach them. But that giving them grace of like, we're all learning as we go along. Like teachers, we're learning this as we go along too when, we're getting new technology and we have to kind of learn together. And I
Mhm.
think if you phrase it that way, students are like, oh, it's not just like this, the teacher's telling me to do this and there's rules and there's consequences and that's it. It's like we're just kind of in a community and we're figuring it out together. So I think that is very important. I like the point you brought up with class sizes. And I'm curious because I have been in some big class sizes when I taught in public school. And I know this is more of a public school concern. What is the biggest class size that you have come across, either as a teacher or as a parent?
In the public school, I would say about 35 to 40. And then the charter school is about 20 to 25. And then my kids' school is probably 10 to 15 in the
Okay.
class.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
I realize that not everybody can
Yeah.
afford to go to a private or independent school, religious or not. And even with scholarships,
Yeah.
scholarships do help. And I think they broaden the socioeconomic diversity at the school, and they're so important and valued. But even with a scholarship, I realize that's not an option for everybody. And I'm thankful that our country offers free education
Yeah.
and that charter schools are able to do their own thing and still be publicly funded. That's
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
So I think another thing that teachers can do is not overuse technology.
Hmm.
And, and the reason why I say that is in relation to a point that you brought up earlier about critical thinking. I think when students have to sit with an actual textbook or an actual reading book um, and a journal, notepad, etc., they are interacting. They're not skimming or scanning.
Hmm.
they're really physically interacting with reading material, and they're able to highlight and make notes and sit with it and not be
Mm,
distracted by things that are coming in or available on, say, a Chromebook. So Chromebooks are useful.
mhm,
However, I think handwriting is important, and it just takes what's in your brain through your hand down to the page. And there have been studies about that and how
mhm,
important that is for brain development and learning. So I want to advocate for handwriting and old-fashioned tools, and for teachers still having, if not mandatory textbooks, then optional textbooks and
mhm,
encouragement around that, so that a
mhm,
student preparing for a math exam can flip through the pages and see the colors and the headings and how it's organized
mm,
versus just through this small
mhm,
screen. I think that's so limiting.
mhm. Yes, there's a lot of psychology, and I talk about that with all of my classes, not just psychology class, that handwriting is actually helping your brain process information. You're also using your own shorthand, right? You can draw images, you can doodle. I often find, and I do this during meetings, like I tell my students, you doodling on a notebook is also processing information. And maybe like a thought comes to mind and you create an image that goes along with it. So I love doing different styles of notes. I teach more 11th and 12th grade. So I try to not give a mandatory note style, but say, here are the various options of note taking. I highly suggest handwritten or at least tablet, like even if you have like an iPad. Because at least you're still doing something that's motor skills, right?
Hmm.
And instead of like outline format, copy paste, because a lot of students now have online books. It's very easy to like copy paste kind of definitions and think like you got it.
Hmm.
And I'm also not the kind of teacher that's like, well, we'll wait and just see how you do on the test. So clearly, if you didn't do that well on the test, then you can go back and look at your note-taking skills. Yes, that there is that, but I think we do have a responsibility as educators and school systems to give structure and scaffolding on how to do that as a learner, because you're not just born into this world knowing like how to take notes or how to learn or process information, and that's part of the learning experience. So I advocate for note-taking for books over like just reading online. And we do a little bit of both. Like we give out hard copy readings in history. We don't have like a history textbook in my particular course because we like to do a lot of research and like gather lots of sources for our students and then have them find their own sources. But when we do give readings, they're usually hard copies. They have to annotate. We teach them different ways to annotate. We teach them different symbols. Adding a little heart is like something that you really like about what you read. Adding a question is like, I have a question about this, and then write the question in the column or in the sidebar. Looking up a word you don't know, circle it and then actually look it up and then write like a brief definition. It takes time. Of course, at first the students are like, this is going to take me a really long time, but you're going to walk away with knowing a lot more and engaging in the text. And then we do have Socratic seminars where then they have to bring that to the conversation. And if you do that work, you are going to be much more engaged in that conversation than with like, oh, I barely just like read it and I highlighted a bunch of things. Then you're not really gonna have much to say in that conversation. And we often tell them, like, if you are going on to college, these are expectations for you. It's expected to actually read, to annotate, engage, and then be engaged in the classroom with conversation. And you may be called out. It may affect your, rapport with the professor in the class, not just your grade, but that relationship that you have in the class if you're not prepared. And it just shows that you care and you're invested in the work. So I think there's a lot of layers there. But yeah, I was curious about the class size because when I taught in Hawaii, in public school, my biggest class size was around like 36, 38. And I
Mm.
had middle school, ESL, students with lots of different IEPs and 504 plans, and I was the only teacher. I had maybe like an ESL teacher for some of the students that really needed that extra kind of ESL support.
Hmm.
Um, that was challenging. It's very hard. So at some point, I think bigger national conversation with policy too is funding public education, more money going into that, more money going into teacher salaries because we need to recruit more teachers. We have so many leaving,
Hmm.
especially public education. So that's going to become even more of a stressor of not having enough teachers and those class sizes actually becoming more inflated. So I think pushing at the national level. how we fund education is going to be a really important conversation in these election years coming up. So before we leave and end this conversation, thank you so much. Congratulations on the awards that you have won for your book. Is there anything else you want to share about yourself, about your book, and then, of course, also how our listeners can find you? And I will plug all of that into the show notes so that they could easily click on a link and go purchase your book and find you anywhere out there on the internet.
Thank you. Yeah, I love what you said about giving students options and choice and scaffolding regarding note taking and responding to reading. That's so important. And those are life skills that they will take into college and into the future as adults. So thank you for speaking up about that. And I agree with funding education, of course. So much can be done with more money, especially in the public and charter realms. So thank you for speaking up about that. And I just wanted to give a shout out to my kids' school where they do a lot of hands on learning. And I think it's important, like you were talking about doodling and how students can be imaginative and inventive and creative when they have time to think. And it's so important to use our hands when learning and to be outside in nature. I know you share that value. The school that they go to is outdoor ed focused, and we're grateful
Mm.
for that. So, yeah, project based learning, student centered when possible. I share those values with you. Thank you for bringing light to them through your book, The Guided Teacher.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I love it. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about Despite the Buzz. It's been tricky because to be in alignment with my values and my message in the book, I don't want to be online too much promoting this, right? But as an author and as a professional who's trying to further herself, personally and professionally, I do use tech as a tool. And so you can order Despite the Buzz on bookshop.org, which supports the independent community, independent bookstores, and indie authors. So bookshop.org, of course, Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And then if you ask for it in a smaller independent bookstore, they should be able to order it. I distribute widely through Ingram Spark. I am an indie author, so I partnered with a hybrid publisher, or some people call that a small press or assisted uh, path to publishing. So that's the route that I took. And you can find me on Goodreads. I'd love it if you marked Despite the Buzz as want to read or read with a rating and review. Thank you, because Goodreads influences Amazon. And I like to connect with people there. I write reviews there all the time, and you're welcome to follow my reviews on Goodreads. And then I'm on LinkedIn as Tamara Davis and Instagram as Tamara Miller Davis and hashtag Despite the Buzz. And then Facebook is Despite the Buzz. So I think that covers it. The website is despitethebuzz.com. And you're welcome to reach out to me on there. And I'd be happy to add you to my newsletter list. I send out a newsletter about once every other month. And with that, I'll recap what I'm doing and insights that I've had around technology's influence or writing or other things that I'm interested in. And I share resources through that newsletter. And yeah, I could also email resources. There are digital wellness links in the back of the book. And I wanted to say that parents should go to Wait Until 8th. I think it's
Mm.
waituntil8th.com. That website I found to be really helpful. And we did sign a pledge for my son to wait until 8th to get a phone. And then he got it halfway through his 8th grade year, and we have set up parental controls. He does not sleep with it. He gets random phone checks, and I feel good about having that
Mm.
structure. So, doing the research, reading about it, and going about it mindfully with my own kid is a learning experience. And so I'm doing my best with that. But yes, Wait Until 8th is great, and as is Screenagers. And then there are a variety of other resources that I'd be happy to email to people. So thank you.
I could link that as well with your contact information and all the social media links that you mentioned where you're located. I can link those other resources in the show notes too. Oh, thank you so much for coming on the Teacher Story. I think you're not only a brilliant author, and wonderful, parent who's doing the good work to set up your children for success. I love this idea of wait till eighth and really having the controls in place and systems in place so that it's really healthy for your children. But you're an education advocate. You really are. And your story is part of this movement. I really believe that we are in a movement to create a new education system. And even every little, move that we can move that dial just a little bit to make it a system where we have children, we have the adults in the education system flourishing, healthy, positive. Um, and I'm seeing such great work from so many people, and I love what you're doing. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I love your podcast. You're making connections, you're giving people voice. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning into the Teacher Story. Your support fuels my mission to shape a brighter future for our children. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, liking, and leaving a review. You can also support me by donating to my Buy Me a Coffee fund, linked in the show notes. Don't forget to explore my guests' work and show them your support. Together, we can make a difference in education. We do this in community. We rise together.